This week's conference, after all, is about bringing an end to sexual violence in conflict.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a very difficult week for us all, I think. Women's Hour came from the summit this morning, and we've had some terrible stories, but also a lot of hope. A foreign secretary who declared himself a feminist, which I was very pleased about, and Angelina Jolie, who talked very openly about how upsetting she had found the stories that she'd heard, but then how she'd realised that what you need in this kind of event is politicians who know how to make and shake, which is why she, luckily, got together with that feminist foreign secretary, William Hague. And, you know, what we were hearing this week, and we'll be hearing for the rest of the week, is it must stop, and it must stop. And tonight we'll be hearing more of those terrible testimonies. Can I ask you just a couple of things? Please don't take photographs of anyone in the audience, because it could be very, very dangerous. Some of the people in the audience would like to go back to Sri Lanka, and it would be very dangerous for them if they were identified as being at an event like this. There is an official photographer, there's also a documentary crew here, and they will give you copies of photographs if you want them, but please don't take them yourselves. And there won't be a question and answer session this evening. We will just hear the testimonies. Now, officially, the civil war in Sri Lanka ended in May 2009 with the defeat of the Tamil Tiger rebels, a group that fought for 26 years for a Tamil homeland in the northeast of the island, but were proscribed as terrorists in a lot of countries for their use of child soldiers and suicide bombers. The United Nations has said the death toll in those final months of war in Sri Lanka could reach between 40 to 70,000 Tamil civilians, a staggering number considering the size of the terrain. Both parties have been accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, but UN experts, one of whom is in the room, Yasmin Sooka, have said the majority of the killing was due to government fire. The Sri Lankan military maintained it operated a zero civilian casualty policy and was mounting a humanitarian rescue operation to save Tamil civilians, not kill them. Well, the war and its aftermath is now subject to an official investigation by the United Nations. This should also include the allegations of sexual violence. Some of you may have seen on television some of the horrific images of the executions of captured Tamil men and women naked and bound. Today we're focusing on what is happening right now, 5 years after the guns were silenced. The Sri Lankan government's narrative is one of reconciliation, peace and reconstruction, but these survivors tell a very different story. The extracts you're going to hear tonight come from among 40 legal statements taken from young men and women who recently escaped to Britain after being sexually tortured by the security forces in the post-war period. A lot of them, by no means all, had some tenuous association with the Tigers in the past. If you lived in northern Sri Lanka, apparently it was hard to avoid. Several people in the room have also documented rape and torture in Sri Lanka in their professions as doctors, lawyers, charity workers and journalists, and if you have a chance, do speak to them. The horror story begins in the same way: abductions in white vans, vehicles that have become synonymous with terror in the island, and it ends with family members paying bribes to the security forces through intermediaries to secure release, and then a terrifying journey abroad to safety while still suffering immense physical and psychological wounds. Now, our first reading is by the British Tamil artist MIA, who speaks on behalf of a young mother abducted very recently in the north of Sri Lanka.